Alright, people, so now this is the spoiler review of The Lobster. So notice, if you haven't seen The Lobster and you want to see this movie, do not watch this video because I am going to be pretty much giving away everything about this movie. But for those of you who don't want to see The Lobster, or have seen it, or just don't care about it, continue to watch on, and let's begin with this movie. So The Lobster, as I mentioned in my earlier review, this takes place in a futuristic world, or in an alternate world in which relationships, you have to be in one. And at the beginning of the movie, Colin Farrell, as his wife has left him after 12 years, and he has to go to this hotel again, a relationship. Along him, he goes with his brother, he got turned into a dog because his brother was at the hotel earlier on. It wasn't shown in the movie, but it's sort of explained that his brother couldn't fall into love, couldn't get into a relationship, and he was turned into an animal of his choosing, which was a dog. Now, in this world, dogs are viewed as basically people who have no creativity or no imagination, since dogs are pretty common. And when Colin Farrell goes to the hotel and he says he wants to be an animal, he chooses a lobster because they're blue-blooded, all that stuff. I don't remember the exact details about him being a lobster but I mean, I'll just say to you this much, that that the reason that there's few many lobsters is because not that many people want to be them, so that's why they're endangered. Meanwhile, many people want to be dogs, and there are plenty of them. So he goes to the hotel and he meets up with John C. Reilly and another guy there. And throughout the movie, John C. Reilly is kind of a nut in this movie. He's not he has kind of a stutter in this movie. Meanwhile, the other guy, he falls into this relationship with this one girl who has a bloody nose. So in order, to get out of there quicker, he develops a relationship with this woman by lying that he bleeds his nose by hitting his head against walls when she's not there to get his nose to bleed. And then also Colin Farrell fake falls in love with this woman who's kind of a psychopath who is doesn't talk a lot but loves sadistic shit. Really, I mean at one point it gets so bad that she kills Colin Farrell's brother. He pretends not to be disgusted by it, but he ends up being disgusted by it. So she is gonna snitch on him to get him to turn into an animal, but then he ends up capturing her and turns her into an animal. We don't know what it is, but then later on, he goes to a forest where he goes off to live with the abandoned ones, or really the ones who escape from the hotel and are the single people. And so he goes out there and we see a pig, and I suspect that was honestly the girl that Colin Farrell turned that crazy psycho girl into. I'm not sure, but it's a possible theory. But anyhow, he goes out into the woods and he meets Lea Seydoux' character, who is the head of the single people. And there's a bunch of rules, and it's kind of like the hotel rules. And while they're out there, they have to watch out for the hunters from the hotel. Now, I didn't explain this yet, but let me just explain this. While Colin Farrell was at the hotel, him and everyone else had to capture the single people to bring them to the hotel to determine the animals, since those are people who escaped. And Colin Farrell is now the prey instead of the predator now. And he meets Rachel Weisz, who is another escapee, and they fall in love with each other over time, but they're not allowed to because they have to be single. And they pretend to be a relationship couple when they go into the city, because they go into the city because they get supplies there. That's how they supply their whole barrage or whatever. And so then one night when they're on a trip, Colin Farrell runs into John C. Reilly, who is about to tranquilize him, but doesn't really do it because Colin Farrell basically gets him down, tranquilizes him. So and so then later on in the movie, Lea Seydoux finds out that Rachel Weisz is having a relationship with Colin Farrell, and that they're gonna move out. And so that out of the woods. So she ends up taking her to a doctor, and she gets her eyes cut out, so she's blind. And Colin Farrell finds out about this, so then the two of them escape out of the woods because he has to bury himself when Lea Seydoux finds out about this, but he ends up somehow surviving. So then he ends up leaving Lea Seydoux to get buried in a hole herself and get eaten by dogs. So then they end up going to this village, or the same city really, and Colin Farrell goes to the diner bathroom, and then and the way the movie ends is that he decides whether or not to cut out his own eyes to make himself blind or not. And that's a really good moral question. And the reason why I think about that is because, it really shows you the dedication about whether or not would you risk your own health and safety to be in love with another person. I mean, it is a disturbing movie, I'm going to say that, but in an interesting kind of disturbing way. Now, the reason why I gave out so much plot in this movie was because, there's a lot of shit that goes on in this movie, honestly. I mean, I couldn't explain it in the review I did without giving it much of it away, but now that you know what's going on, here are my further thoughts on it. I think that, throughout this movie, I think that the relationship between Rachel Weisz and, honestly, Colin Farrell is one that, is heartbreaking, but it's also really enjoyable to see because it's actual love. It's love that's not set by any boundaries, not any conditions, not a forced love really that you have to go through in order just to live in life. Like, I also noticed the parallels between the two films of The Hotel and The Forest and how they're both kind of controlling societies that set their own rules that are pretty strict. But, they're both in different ways. You think you get freedom, but in reality you just get enslavement. And the really true freedom is just being happy and being with someone or being like around people that you really trust. I mean, Colin Farrell, he's had a pretty rough life. I mean, first of all, his brother gets killed. Like, his wife leaves him and he's forced to go to this hotel now. The person that he's in love with in the woods gets blinded. I mean, this kind of shit is just awful. But yeah, Colin Farrell, Rachel Weisz, they somehow don't give up and they manage to get through. John C. Reilly, I think he's one of those people who's not necessarily a bad guy, but he just feels like, he's the kind of one of those enslaved people who just accepts what he has. I mean, throughout this movie, I gotta say, the character development, the writing, this is just a really fantastic movie, once again, after talking about this for a second time, so hopefully that should give you some more clarification about The Lobster. So yeah, people, go see this movie. If you were still interested in even seeing it, because I haven't even talked more about it yet, but I just want to give you the basic plot outlines that were spoilerish. But yeah, people, still go see this movie. This is absolutely amazing. So till again, this is White Rice signing off. Bye.